On today's World Insight, strong world trade with China's steadfast support for a multilateral trading system, in the words of WTO Director-General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. So what's the unflinching outlook on global trade amid tiffs over raising tariffs? Answers to this and more in tonight's special edition, The Future of Trade.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian, here in Geneva, our special program, The Future of Trade. This year marks a historic milestone. After 25 years negotiations, the WTO agreement on fishery subsidies had finally entered into force this Monday, a major victory for multilateralism. And also the 2025 World Trade Organization WTO Public Forum wrapped up this Thursday. The forum spotlighted pressing issues like digital trade, artificial intelligence, and the U.S. reciprocal tariffs. And last but certainly not least, China and the U.S. held another round of economic talks in Spain this week, with both sides praising the constructive dialogue. On the sideline of the WTO Public Forum, I sat down with WTO Director-General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala for an exclusive interview. She highlighted China's steadfast support for the agreement on fisheries subsidies and multilateralism. Madam Director-General, congratulations for another year's success of the WTO Public Forum.
Well, thank you so much, Yanwei, and I'm so glad to see you here and for you to interact with the members. We're getting a lot of positive feedback.
And I love the fact that it is right after the fishery subsidies came into force.
Absolutely. This is a monumental achievement for the WTO members. And I want to take the opportunity to also thank China. China was one of the earlier members to ratify the agreement, but also helped by working hard to try to persuade other members who had not ratified to do so. So Ambassador Shengang Li was with us at that time, and he and his staff, and I know people in capital in Beijing also worked very hard. Right. So thank you. I should say thank you also to our
Thank you,
members.
Madam DG, for you and your team's hard work. Having said that, though, there are a lot of rhetorics against WTO over the past few years. Madam DG, I'm sure you know it better than anybody else in this world. Some say it's useless, others say it's teethless, and there are so many different ways of describing WTO. What do you think is the role of WTO today, and how much do you think the reform will be able to bring WTO for its potential?
Well, we don't buy into any of the descriptions are coming out of frustration. I think the role of the WTO is to provide stability and predictability in world trade. And business people trade. And many of the business people from all our members, they understand very well the value of the WTO. Business people who trade want predictability and stability. They want to know that when their goods go from one country to another, that they're going to arrive and they will know how the goods will be valued, what tariffs to expect, and therefore how marketable their goods will be in the country that is importing those goods and whether they'll make a profit out of it. So that the predictability of global rules is what the WTO stands for, and the stability. And so I think that this is what is important. People take the system for granted. They expect to walk into a store and just find the goods they want to buy sitting there. But the rules that underpin that trade that brings the goods is not well known. Now, we also need to admit that you talked about reforms, that the WTO needs to listen to criticisms. And the WTO is made up of its members, and many of them are criticizing one thing or the other about the way it functions. This is a golden opportunity for members to say, okay, global trade is in a crisis, let's seize the opportunity to do the reforms and tackle the challenges of the system and make it even better.
And now in the reform, you have been talking to both your staff and to the international community about how to preserve, how to reform, and how to follow up and update the WTO system for the new trends. Among them, do you prioritize? Obviously, you cannot do all the things all at the same time. How to prioritize them?
But I think the way you put it, Tian, is very, very good. Because I think the first objective in my second term is to say, what is it that works? What works for the global trading system at the WTO? And there are some very important things that work that I alluded to. The fact that 72% of world trade is still on WTO terms today. It's down from 80% at the beginning of the year pre-tariffs, but now we're still at 72%. That's a high number. How do we preserve that? The second thing is, what are the other rules within the WTO that are important we need to preserve? We have, the WTO helps to set standards on human safety and product safety in trade. It builds trust. How do we preserve that? Most members value that. So secondly, we have other agreements on intellectual property protection, for instance, that are also very valued by the business community. How do we preserve that? So preserving what works. The second is to ask the question, what doesn't work? We cannot be complacent. We have many things, many challenges to fix. And that is, so the priority number one is preserving what works. Priority number two is fixing what does not work. And among that, we have issues to look at. There are several that are important. One, how we make decisions. The world is changing very, very fast, with technology advancing and AI at a fast pace. The organization needs to be more nimble, more flexible, more swift to deliver for the world. And so we have a consensus decision-making system, unanimity, which is very valuable, meaning the smallest member has the same power as the largest. But we need to make it work better, so that we can make decisions faster. So
Plurilateral, for example?
That means, what that can translate into is that perhaps when there's an issue to solve, a coalition of willing members who find that issue very important can get together and decide to work on it and to come to an agreement, and other members who do not particularly want to join can let them get ahead with it. So more flexible plurilaterals and decision-making systems, that could be one. Looking at issues of fair trade, many members complain about each other's trading practices. The issue is, can we be very candid and specific? What is it that is not fair? How do we solve those unfair? How do we, how do we give incentives so that members can do the right thing? How do we become more transparent? So that is another set of reforms we can look at. So just to give you a couple of examples of some of the priority things we need to look at. Then the last thing, the last set of issues to look at is there are many exciting things happening in the trade world. We've got digital trade, we've got the advent of AI. By the way, our latest World Trade Report that looks at the role of AI in trade indicates what we call 40 by 40, that the value of trade could increase by 40% by 2040 with AI. But that means we also have to have the right policies in place. If we don't, it could result in some countries being left behind. How do we look at these new issues and encourage digital trade, green trade, other aspects of trade, services trade, which is growing very fast?
Yeah. I was reading a book that you wrote about, it's called Reform the Unreformable. So what do you think is needed in order to get that done? Very briefly from you.
Briefly, I think it is the political will of members. And political will goes beyond ambassadors in Geneva. I do not believe that ambassadors alone can tackle the reforms. We need ministers to be involved. We need leaders to be involved. And I'm very grateful that many members, many ministers and leaders are also coming together now and saying we will support the reforms.
MC14 coming up next year. This year already celebrating 30th anniversary of WTO. So how much pragmatically do you think can be done at MC14?
I would hope that at MC14, 2 or 3 things. First, that ministers are able to debate these reforms and come behind a package of reforms, and not just the reforms, the modalities, how the reforms will actually be implemented. If they can agree on set of reforms and modalities at MC14, I think it will be very good for the world trading system. And then we have one or two other agreements that we could be looking at. We have the moratorium on customs duties for electronic transmissions. Can we renew that? We have a couple of other agreements, like the investment facilitation for development agreement. I think China has also been quite helpful with that. Can we get that inserted into the WTO rule book? Those are some of the things we can look at.
Global trade is at a crossroads, so is the uphill struggle toward stable global trade governance with the WTO at its core. From the floor of the WTO Public Forum in its headquarters in Geneva, CGTN is bringing you the latest insights and action plans on this topic. At this critical moment, join me for trade for our shared future. That's my exclusive interview with the Director General of the World Trade Organization. During our conversation, she also touched on the China-US talks in Madrid. She welcomed the two sides' efforts to resolve differences through dialogue, stressing the crucial role of communication between the world's top two economies. She calls such engagements key to preventing escalation and reducing harm to the global economy. This week, for example, China and the United States interacted with one another in Spain. And this round of talks certainly have reached a certain consensus. What does that mean? The two largest economies of the world and also members of WTO interact with one another in order to solve the trade problems between them. What is the take from you?
Well, the take from me and from our side here at the WTO Secretariat is a very positive one. We think that the two largest economies in the world and largest trading partners talking to each other, trying to talk through the problems and the challenges is a very positive sign. Because if China and the US enter into a trade war with each other, it impacts not just their economies, but the economies of the rest of the world, and the poorest countries will suffer the most. So we are pleased to see this dialogue, and we hope for continued understanding between the two.
What might be the best wishes that you can send to them, and what do you think should be included in the conversation?
I would hope to say, please let China and the US continue to dialogue with each other. We believe that the path of dialogue, which is what the WTO is built for, as a platform for members to dialogue, exchange views, and solve problems together. I hope that the two leaders will encourage it.
Madam Director General, there are quite a number of myths about WTO when it comes to people's rhetoric against WTO. There are also a lot of myths about the realities of trade today in our world. For example, whether trade redirection is after, for example, China and the United States in tariff war, the trade will go to other places and flood the markets. There are a lot of myths like that that's not based on statistics and data. How does the WTO help its members to come to realize what is the reality of trade today?
Well, we are evidence-based and we monitor. And I have to say, in a month or so ago, we were not seeing so much trade diversion. But now, if you want to call it that, but now we're seeing that. The evidence is showing us trade between China and the US is going down, and that trade is going elsewhere. Okay, but members need to look at it. And we've said to members, look at it. If you feel that something is happening with the trade, the first thing is have a dialogue with China and discuss it and see how you can manage this. The second is WTO has so many tools within its toolbox that can help members to talk to each other and manage these issues of trade. We have a lot of tools, and I think some members are using it. So that's the way to go. The WTO is a platform for dialogue. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to settle these things in an amicable way.
Right. And not let the myths spread around, but rather let the data spread
around.
Let
the data and the evidence show. We always go out when we're evidence-based. That's why we didn't say anything until we were looking at the data of most favored nation, how much of trade is going on, and we show that, wow, 72% is going on.
What do you make of the current reality of global governance as the Director General of WTO, which is the one and only in the world on global trading system?
Well, I think that, the multilateral trading system that was built over 80 years ago, and global governance in general, has centered around developing institutions for global cooperation. There are so many problems in the world that cannot be solved by one country alone. And that is why you need multilateral cooperation. Let's just take pandemics. Tomorrow we could see another one. There isn't a single country on its own that can deal with a pandemic. You need global cooperation to be able to come up with answers. So multilateral institutions are needed. But there's no doubt that they need to reform so that they can be able to deal more swiftly with the problems of today and tomorrow. So I think multilateralism is key. I think it needs to be reformed to be nimbler, swifter, and I think China has been a strong supporter of multilateralism, and at the WTO, a strong support, especially with dealing with developing countries in terms of capacity building and support. And we hope that countries that are major economies and leaders will continue to find a way to, yes, help solve global problems through international cooperation, through global institutions.
China has been making it very clear that China supports the international trade system with the WTO at its core. Recently, we have also been hearing from the Chinese leaders talking about the global governance initiative. Well, this is just one of those many initiatives in terms of global governance that China has in mind. What do you make of these efforts?
Well, Secretary General Guterres, I think, recently made a statement welcoming the support for global cooperation and for multilateralism with the UN and other organizations at the core. And we think it's a good thing. As I said, you need global institutions to solve global problems and deal with global public goods that cannot be dealt with by any one country. So good global governance is important.
We have seen China now during the war of tariff, even before that, been working on domestic consumption and the transformation, so-called high-quality development. Now it's also drawing up its 15th five-year plan. As you know, this is crucial for China's economic development. There's always a plan and then follow-up and the implementation. What do you think, from the DG of WTO's perspective, should be included in those plans?
I think it's correct to do that because some of the issues in trade that are being blamed on trade are actually not the fault of trade. You know, some of the deficits and surpluses come from macroeconomic imbalances, from the need for one country to stimulate domestic consumption and another country to deal with the fiscal deficit. You know, the US to deal with its high fiscal deficit, China to deal with domestic consumption. And these macroeconomic imbalances lead to trade imbalances. So emphasis on domestic consumption, I think, is very appropriate. On high quality development is very good because China is still needing to improve the prosperity of its people and increase their social well-being. So I think that is good. And some of these emphasis, and you need trade to fit into some of these aspirations. So I think that's a move in the right direction to emphasize domestic consumption.
Global trade is at a crossroads, so is the uphill struggle toward stable global trade governance with the WTO at its core. From the floor of the WTO Public Forum in its headquarters in Geneva, CGTN is bringing you the latest insights and action plans on this topic. At this critical moment, join me for Trade for Our Shared Future. During my conversation with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, she also touched on the 30th anniversary of Beijing Declaration and the platform for action issued at the 4th World Conference on Women held in Huairou, Beijing. The WTO Director General recalled her participation in that historic conference 30 years ago and expressed delight at seeing more women stepping up into prominent roles globally. Madam DG, as you know, 30 years ago, the International Women's Conference was held. It was the very first time clearly made to the rest of the world that women's rights are human rights. And I see you over the past decades, a very strong leader, not only for global governance, but also for women as well.
Thank you.
Championing gender equity. Now, this year is likely to be another important conference being held in China to mark 30 years. It's called Beijing Plus 30. So at this critical juncture, when the world is changing so much, what do you think the role of women leadership in the dramatically changing world?
Well, first I was at the Beijing conference in 1995 myself.
Can I? Can I?
I was a young woman then, younger.
I was the youngest Chinese volunteer then.
You know, so I have very fond memories of that conference, and it was a very dear thing to those of us women. And since then, one has, of course, had a lot of experience and been privileged to be in leadership. And I think what the world needs to recognize is that women are not, you don't need to bring women in leadership because they are women. It is because they merit it and they have a lot to contribute. And I think that women leaders have demonstrated, so many of them, that women can bring very good contributions, whether in whatever area of leadership they are in. And I could go on naming woman after woman who has demonstrated that. I don't think we need to do that. A lot of studies now show that bringing women into the economy, empowering them is good, not only for their families, but for their countries and for the world. So I think that the right thing to do is to open the way so that there can be more women in leadership. There's still too few. When I sit here and people tell me you're the first woman and the first African, I have very mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, I'm saying so late in the game, is the first woman and the first African. We don't have to be in this position because we are women or Africans, but we have to be in the position because we are merit-worthy to lead the organization. And if the leader is a woman and an African, good. But there are many women who have the qualifications. When I was doing the interview for my job, I was a little impertinent. And I said to them, what you need is the best person to lead this organization and help it change and help it reform. And I said, if it's a woman, and I said to them, well, of course I think I can do it, you know, but you need the best person. And I think, and I'm grateful that I got the job, but it's not because I'm a woman and African, it's because the people that thought, here's someone who can lead this organization. I want people to think of women in that light. There are so many women with so many good qualifications. And if you look at the younger generation of women, you'll be so proud. So many of them have the qualities it takes. So let's give women even more of a chance now that we're at Beijing Plus 30.
Yeah, you have been very instrumental, Madam DG, in bringing in young trade leaders into the conversation of WTO, and also to bring in the voices coming from the global south, developing countries, especially the least developed economies. Now, how much do you think that conversation can continue, given the fact that some describe the world today, it is the rules of the jungle?
Well, first of all, let me thank my colleagues in the organization, because the staff of the WTO and the managers worked really hard, so I want to give them credit. But that being said, it's so fabulous to have young global leaders. It's so fabulous to think of trying to give the South as much of a voice. The young global leaders are important because we need to listen to the young people. They are the next generation of the future. They need to tell us, is this trading organization being relevant for our issues? Is it delivering for us? What does it need to do to change the way it is doing business? I really like to listen to young people. I like to listen to the business community and to civil society. Okay, so for us, it's very refreshing. And then in terms of the South, developing countries and least developed countries join this organization, expecting the organization to help them prosper their people more. And one of the purposes of the WTO, or the purpose, is to enhance living standards, to help create employment, and to support sustainable development. And the question least developed countries and other poor countries are asking is it doing this? So it's important to enhance their voice and say, look, we need to do better. They have been stagnating at 1% of trade. The 44 least developed countries are only 1% of world trade. Is that sufficient? The answer is no. We need to do more. And it is good that China is opening up its markets. It has announced zero tariffs for African countries. I hope they can take adequate advantage of these opportunities so we can trade, they can trade more, expand their share of the markets. Africa's share of global trade is less than 3% and has not been increasing for many years. So whatever China can do to encourage that. The second thing to encourage that also is investment. We need to deal with the risk perception of developing countries that they are too risky. We need supply chains to decentralize to developing countries, create jobs, create value so they can trade more.
Madam Director General, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Tian.
Thank you. That's my exclusive interview with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Okonjo-Iweala. At the end of our interview, she shared her personal anecdotes about her experiences with CGTN.
In our house in the village, we have, of course, this cable thing, network. Yeah. But when we arrived, it wasn't working. And then we switched on the TV. But do you know the interesting thing? The only international channel working was CGTN.
Oh, wonderful. That's wonderful.
And this is working in the village. I was so impressed.
Oh, I am very encouraged.
For 2 days we couldn't get the regular cable thing working. Yeah. So we could get the local TV and CGTN.
Is there?
Those were the only two sources. I kept saying I must tell her one day. I'm so happy. I'm just telling you a true story.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel, follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my teams here in Geneva and in Beijing. Thanks for being with us. In the future editions of our special program, The Future of Trade, we're going to focus on some panels I moderated on the WTO Public Forum this year. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.